Is gender just a social construct? Like, would the world just be a lot nicer if there was no such thing as male and female?
So the modern idea of gender is this idea that my inner sense of identity can exist on a plane independent from my body. And so my body could be one thing, but my gender identity could be another.
We're very blessed to today to have Jason Evert. I don't think Jason needs an introduction for my audience, however, still he's doing amazing work in the area of chastity with sexuality, and he's really on a mission to spread the virtue of chastity all around the world. He's the author of many books, all of which I have read and can encourage people to read, and we'll put links in the show notes. But his most recent book is called Male, Female, or Other, a Catholic Guide to Gender. So this interview today is going to be based on that book, and we're going to be getting into a lot of the, honestly, like heaps of questions I have around gender and gender dysphoria. And we really want to speak a bit of truth and mercy, love and understanding into this topic. You created the U program, so an online course helping bring the TOB to teens and young people. And I've used that course a lot. When I first started teaching TOB courses, that was the program we used for the first 2 years. People loved that. And is it true to say, Jason, you'd probably give around, I know we just had COVID and that messed things up a bit, but in general, you'd probably give 150 assemblies a year, 100,000 people a year. Is that true to say, roughly?
Yeah, we've been doing it for 25 years, so we're probably just over 2 million teens in person right now.
Wow. Okay, good. So yeah, so you're speaking at churches, youth conferences, schools, and even you've done every World Youth Day, I think, since at least since Sydney, which is when I heard of you. So yes, and look, I think you're the host of the Lust is Boring podcast, which is incredible as well. And you are an Aussie favorite, mate. There's so many young Aussies. I'm 30 now. I heard you when I was 15 the first time. But I think there's so many Australians, honestly, which is so exciting, that can trace their conversion or their reversion back to either your talk at World Youth Day. And it's kind of like over here, it's a bit of we like to be able to say that we were in that talk and share how we heard you first and all that stuff. But you've had a huge impact on the church in Sydney and in Australia. And so it's a real honor for me always to speak to you again. But I think most importantly, and I think you would be happy that I would say this as well, most importantly, you're married to Kristalina, and you're the father to 8 children. Is that correct?
Yep.
8 children. So that's I think that's the most beautiful part about your introduction. But Jason, it is really good to have you on, mate. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to coming back to Australia in December. Can't wait. I think I've been there 4 or 5 times now. Absolutely loved every minute of every other trip. So can't wait to come back. Awesome.
God bless you, mate. So look, so as I said, the interview today, we want to pick apart your book, and I think your title says everything, right? So male, female, or other. And I think you've said so many times in talks and things that there's hundreds of genders now that we can choose from on, when young people are enrolling into colleges in the United States. I don't think it's quite reached that here yet in Australia. But when they're asked what gender they are, male and female is sometimes not even on the form, correct?
Yeah.
So look, we're certainly heading there. I think Australia is heading in that direction, and we're seeing a lot more of this stuff come up. So it's a super important topic. So I would love to just start with a very basic question, which is kind of it's a few questions in one. But what is gender? How many genders are there? There was a university professor in Australia that said in a class I was in, he said, we all know that sex is between our legs and gender is between our ears. And so I think this has kind of led to a lot of confusion. Well, is sex the same thing as gender? Are these two different things now? So I think this is really confusing, right? So what's the difference between sex and gender? If there is a difference, how many genders are there? Is gender just a social construct? Would the world just be a lot nicer if there was no such thing as male and female?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a lot there. In terms of that
Yeah.
professor's statement, gender's between your ears, sex is between your legs. I mean, it's an incredibly, astonishing statement to make from someone who should know a lot better, that if you want to retreat away from the reality of biological sex, the last place you want to hide is the brain, because every single cell of the human body that has a nucleus is sexed. I mean, the neurological evidence for sex differences it is not even debatable. The fact that our male brains, female brains are completely distinct. I mean, you look at the male brain, the female brain. If a man suffers a stroke, it'll take longer for him to recover his speech after the stroke than a woman will, because the woman uses both hemispheres of her brain to speak, whereas the man only uses one. That's why if you actually hit a man hard enough on the left side of his head, he could go completely mute. But if you hit a woman there, she'll just keep right on talking. And so, I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there are literally science textbooks of like 1,000 pages long chronicling the details of neurological sex differences in the brain. And that's just the brain. I mean, scientists have found more than 6,500 sex-specific genes, meaning your arteries are male or female, your esophagus is male or female. Pluck one hair of your head, give it to a forensic scientist to look at it, male and female. And so this is the biological reality of sex, that we're a sexually dimorphic species. And so your sex is determined by how an organism is organized for reproduction. And so there's only two mature reproductive cells. It's either the sperm or the egg. That's it. In terms of the gonads, it's the testes, the ovaries. That's it. There's no third, there's no fourth, there's no spectrum. You could have disorders of sexual development where one or both don't work, as they should, but there is no third or fourth biological sex. And so because of the very clear scientific reality of the fact that we are one or the other, and you can't change from one to the other like some animals can, some lizards and fish can actually change biological sex, humans can't. That's where we come into this term of gender. What does that word mean? Now, back in the 1300s, it was used only in reference to grammar. That noun is masculine, feminine, or neuter in its gender. By the 14th century, it was sometimes used as a synonym for biological sex, but still predominantly in terms of grammar and language. But then what happened in about the 1950s, there was a researcher named Dr. John Money. He was a psychologist, very tortured soul, abused by his dad, and thought that the world would be better if boys were just castrated at birth across the board. This guy promoted the idea of gender roles. Now, it's the first time we'd heard that term before, of this idea that, well, it's just all socially conditioned. And, it's a culturally conditioned thing that girls are interested in those things and boys are interested in these roles. And obviously there's some truth to that. I mean, some of this can be culturally conditioned, but he said it all was, and that it's just the way we raise kids that make the boys more interested in this and the girls more interested in that. Now, the feminists kind of jumped on that and said, see, it's just cultural conditioning that men and women are equal. And so in their good right, their battle for women's rights, they kind of went so far that it's like, well, there is no difference. And now this has come full circle. Well, hey, if there's no difference, then I'm going to start competing in your sports. And I'm going to start using your bathroom, and I'm going to start doing this. And now the feminists like, whoa. By equal, we didn't mean equal, but the horse is already out of the barn in terms of what this ideology has become. And so the modern idea of gender is this idea that my inner sense of identity can exist on a plane independent from my body. And so my body could be one thing, but my gender identity could be another. And that gender identity supersedes sex. In a sense, body, whatever that is, not important. The body is not meaningful. Body's meaningless. What's important is who you think you are. And so if we kind of untether our identity from our body, it has to attach somewhere. But where does it attach? If not the body, it'll just attach to your personality. But there are as many personalities as there are persons. And as a result of this, you will literally end up with an infinite number of genders, which is where we find ourselves today.
Wow. Okay. This is, I mean, this is, this this kind of follows on with that, and I think there's a fantastic video on YouTube that you did, which answers this in more detail. But I think it's a really important question, which I think a lot of people, even that I've spoken to, might have, and that is, if you're saying that, that my throat, like every aspect of my body is sexed, right? Is it possible for someone to be trapped in a body that is not that it, like, is it possible to be trapped in the wrong body to what someone actually might feel like? I remember you said, and I've actually been using this a little bit, and I think it's a really good example. You said, I think it might have been in that talk, about, imagine, for me to cross-dress as a woman just for one day, right? How would that feel, and the discomfort that I might feel if I was wearing makeup and wearing a dress and high heels and all that stuff? There'd be this like, okay, this doesn't match who I feel that I am. And I think you made a really good point, at least to help us even understand what people with gender dysphoria, that is a very sincere struggle, might be feeling. They would feel like, in a sense, I feel like I'm cross-dressing every day because I'm not, how I'm dressing is not really marrying up with what I feel inside. But like, is that actually like is that a real thing? Is it possible that you could have a female, mind, spirit, whatever they might say, in a body that is male? Like, is that a real thing? And how could we, how do we help people with who might genuinely experience that sense that my body does not marry up to what I think I am?
Yeah, and I think we've got to be honest with the lived experience of people, that for some people it may feel like that I am a boy trapped in a girl's body, a girl trapped in a boy's body. Strictly speaking, you can't have a boy trapped in a girl's body, a girl trapped in a boy's. Like, that doesn't happen. You can't have a girl brain in a boy body. Neurologically, scientifically, that's not happening. But what you do have is the genuine experience of feeling that way, of feeling that, like, look, physiologically, I know I'm biologically male, born male, assigned male, whatever terms they want to use, but I really feel like I am not just interested in what girls like, or I feel like a girl, but I feel I am a girl. And this can cause, obviously, considerable distress, discomfort, agonizing, suffering sometimes. And this is what's called gender dysphoria. And so euphoria is a state of peace and contentment and bliss. Euphoria is the opposite of that, a deep distress over a felt incongruence between my biological sex and the inner sense of who I am as a person. And so that's gender dysphoria. I was reading one woman, Dr. Deborah So, and she's not conservative, she's not Catholic. I mean, she used to write for Playboy magazine, but what she pointed out is that to pair together the words trans and kid is part of the lexicon of the trans activist movement, to make you think that some people, by their very nature, are trans. And she says, if we think there are kids that are trans, we will treat them very differently than believing that there are children who experience gender dysphoria. And so we've got to understand that the body, as I had mentioned earlier, is not meaningless, it's meaningful. But sometimes it's true that it doesn't seem to line up with who we feel we are. But then the question comes, okay, who do we trust, though? Do we trust the feelings, or do we trust the body? Which one do we trust is true? And it's hard, because especially as young people, as adolescents, many people who experience gender dysphoria are autistic. In fact, 42% of them, according to the European Journal of Psychology, meet the criterion for an autism diagnosis in the trans community. Now, some of the qualities of being on the autistic spectrum: one, you tend to be a little bit socially awkward, have very rigid black and white thinking patterns, and tend to lock on to subjects of interest with a very voracious, interest, like this is the thing, and are very allergic to any outside interference with your focus on this particular thing. And so if you had, let's say, a 15-year-old girl who's autistic. Now, for autistic girls, they tend to be more interested in things than people. And so she might feel like, I don't fit with the other girls. I like things. I'm not into the things the other girls are like. she feels more comfortable on online interactions than in person. And then she goes to her computer and she discovers these trans influencers like, hey, look, if you feel like you're not at home in your own body and you don't fit with the other girls, well, it's probably because you're non-binary or trans. And this is what those words mean. And then the kids go down this rabbit hole of this online discovery of their authentic self and come out with, hey, mom, dad, I'm non-binary and I want a double mastectomy so I can be my authentic self. Because I mean, fighting autism, fighting anxiety or depression, that's a hard target. I mean, that's like shadow boxing. But if the body becomes the target of intervention, then it can be, in a sense, a wonderful distraction from the things that actually might need clinical intervention. Because now you got a problem, the body. So I need testosterone, puberty blockers, and surgeries, and then I'm going to feel at home in my own body. But then they go through all these things, and quite often the suicide rate climbs after these procedures. After they go on puberty blockers, the girls are more likely to self-harm than they were before going on puberty blockers. And so it promises so much relief, but in the end, the numbers are coming in that it's not working. That's why over in the Scandinavian countries, in Finland, Sweden, you look at what's going on in Norway and Amsterdam, they're backing off. I mean, the biggest gender clinic in the United Kingdom just got shut down because they realized this was not creating solutions, it was creating problems.
It's so important, because I think like what you're describing really is that I think we're living in a culture that is that wants to give no meaning to our flesh, like our body, which is meant to be a sign of God, and all the, you know, this sacramental sign of God. It's so full of meaning, and it's sacred and valuable, all these things. But I think so much of this problem actually has to do with not assigning a lot of meaning or significance to our body, right? Mm-hmm. So just to kind of in case someone is listening to this, because I think this is something that I've really picked up on this whole topic, and I think us as Catholics sometimes can be quite guilty of doing this. And it's that we speak about, you know, like this woke culture, like it's this abstract thing that we need to shoot down, destroy. We need to have all the arguments and the reasons, which is helpful, of course. But I think we sometimes can miss the fact that these are actually people that are involved in this, right? Like, this is not just an idea that I need to arm myself with the answers to fight. Because it's actually, I mean, I don't know, I could be wrong here, and on my own podcast, you're very welcome to tell me I'm wrong. But I mean, I feel like these people higher up that are pushing for this stuff, like I'm not even, I don't even know how many of them might actually be experiencing a lot of this stuff themselves, right? But it's like these young people that are growing up in this culture that are hearing all these debates and arguments, and we're just kind of like arguing at the problem coming from on top of them. But these young people just feel completely alone, misunderstood, and they're like, this problem of gender, this woke culture that Catholics that are trying to fight, they're missing the point that like, look, I'm actually really struggling with all this, and I don't even know how to handle it. So I don't know if I've explained myself very well, but it's like, I think for people of faith, like it's so important, I think, that we don't forget that these are actually real people, you know, in the pews in church every week, that are coming to youth group, that might be hearing homilies that they're like, that are bringing up anger or loneliness in them. It's like, how do we as a church and as people really start to understand that, like, this is something personal. It's not just an abstract like idea we have to fight, because I think it's causing a lot of harm.
You know, I think you make it a really important point that as Catholics, we really need to distinguish the ideology of gender theory from the individuals who experience gender dysphoria. because a lot of times the ideology gets all the attention on the media. And so we just, people just, I got to shoot that down or mock it or dismiss it or disprove it or debate it. And wow, hey, we won that debate and we did our job. We defended the truth. But like for the person who experiences gender dysphoria, they feel like, okay, I feel like you kind of made fun of me there. And I feel like you just erased me and dismissed me and attacked me. And yeah, you made your airtight apologetic arguments, but like, doesn't change the way I wake up and feel not at home in my own body every single day of the week. And so we've got to go beyond just an apologetic defense of Catholic anthropology. Obviously, we have to propose the truth, but we have to learn how to walk with these individuals, accompanying them in truth and love. I think of a situation I saw at the University of Essex over in England, where apparently at this college website, they put up a trans inclusion guide for the incoming students to help them to be sensitive to the subject. And they said there's actually an infinite number of genders. So some guy gets online and kind of reaches out to him and said, hey, I'd like to obtain that list you have of the infinite number of genders. And so they emailed him back and said, well, here's 25 to get you started. And the guy said, look, if you got an infinite number, you can at least furnish me a list of 500 genders, cough it up. And so he sends that over. So now he's using a Freedom of Information Act to actually get the infinite list of genders from this university. And they said, well, we can't give you the list of an infinite because some of them are unknown or unrecognized. And so he types it back and he said, well, how can you count them if they're unknown? And he said, might I propose the reason you can't give me your infinite list of genders is because, for one, it would take forever for you to write the list. And even if you could write the list, the entire world could not contain it, even if you used really tiny font. And that was the end of the debate. And did he win? You betcha. I mean, he crushed that debate. Yeah. But was anyone on that campus who experiences gender dysphoria any better off for this debate? No, nobody won there, because you had on one side of the debate probably someone who spends a lot of time with individuals who identify as trans, but might not be investing a lot of time about thinking about the logical inconsistencies. Then on the other side, you've got someone spending a lot of time thinking about the logical inconsistencies, but spending probably zero time with people in the trans community. And so what if love and logic could kind of meet? What if they could kind of have a beer together? What if we could actually learn how to present this subject with some clarity and with some charity? And so, like you said, it's super important that we realize this is not about just winning a debate. This is about accompanying these individuals because, like you said, they're in the church. And I don't mean just the 16-year-old girl in the youth group who's got blue hair and is dressing in a gender non-conforming way and has lots of objections to church teachings. No, we're talking also about the guy at your parish who's 35 years old and sitting next to his wife and 3 kids in the pew, who comes from the military, looks all machismo, but behind closed doors, he's been wrestling with gender dysphoria since he was a 14-year-old boy. But you don't know it because he just looks so gender conforming. Like, they're in our midst, they're wrestling with their gender. And if all they hear is us making fun of them, dismissing them, they're going to feel like, what's the point of opening up to anybody in the church if they're just going to dismiss me?
Thank you. No, well, that's great to hear that you, that I wasn't wrong just to say that. But I think, look, I mean, in my, and again, I'll be honest, I really have not, like, I've never really spoken to anybody that has experiences gender dysphoria to the point where they have begun the process of transitioning. To use that word, it's always like everyone I've ever spoken to or dealt with has simply been someone that has been a person of faith who just has been wrestling and has not been able to share what they're going through with anybody, and so they've felt quite lonely. And now what I have found is most of the people that I have spoken to that experience this it's actually stemmed from something that could be as simple as, there was a woman in her late 40s who I spoke to once, and she said, look, I grew up with 3 brothers, and my dad just loved those brothers. He'd get home from work and he'd throw the ball with them in the backyard. He'd take them bike riding, and I was the girl that had to stay with mum, and my mum was quite distant and cold and she wasn't very loving. And so she was like, my entire life, I just dreamed of being a boy to get to get the same attention as my brothers. And just recently, again, just I was speaking to a young man who was like, look, he grew up, wasn't very close with his dad, and he had two sisters, and they were like really popular and athletic and sporty and smart, and did really good at school, and just saw his dad praising them all the time for how well they were doing. And then he was like, so I would go I would go into their room while they were away and put on their clothes, and I would fantasize about what life could be like if I was a girl. How would that change how successful I might have been, or how loved I might have been from dad? But I mean, that was an eye-opener for me to see that it really it didn't actually stem from a hatred of their own sex, but more of like there might be something better about being the other sex, right? Mm-hmm. But can I just ask, what, like, just in your experience and when you were studying, what do you think like have we been able to like trace that there are these patterns that lead people to begin to feel experience gender dysphoria? What is the main thing that might actually lead people to feel those things?
Yeah, I think this is what's really
already, but
yeah, I think it's really important that we, in a sense, listen to gender dysphoria with reverent curiosity. And what I mean by that phrase is not for the sake of just obeying it wherever it tells us to go. Well, I feel dysphoric, I want puberty blockers. Okay, here they are. But okay, what's the story being told underneath this? What is the deeper ache? When did this start? What was going on in your life at that time? What kind of triggers the dysphoria? Is it when you're forced to dress in a very gender stereotypical way? Is it the affirmation that you receive that you've seen in your siblings? Because I mean, I've seen that in the teens that I've talked to, of extremely similar narrative to what you just said. That could be going on. I think what's important is that we not take a cookie cutter approach to it of like, okay, boom, here's the cause. You're probably fitting in that box. Because there's a lot of people that don't fit into that box. Like, well, no, I was really well liked by my dad. But I never felt like, I fit in with this stereotypical thing. Or maybe trauma is at the root of it sometimes, sexual abuse. I know of certain cases where there was a young boy and a girl, and their uncle molested the girl in the presence of the boy, but did not molest the boy. And what she learned from that is that had I been a boy, I would have been safe. And so other girls who experience sexual abuse as young children sometimes will try to disguise the evidence of their sexual maturation as a protective mechanism. That if I can appear more masculine and less feminine, I'm less likely to have to relive the trauma of what happened to me when I was 8 years old. And so sometimes that's at play. I meet other young people that say it had a lot to do with pornography, that they got hooked on porn and then eventually stumbled upon genres of transgender porn that they never thought they would have sought out to begin with, found themselves aroused by it, and then started enacting it in their own private lives, and then started questioning their own identity flowing from that. That typically tends to be a more male experience, something called androgynophilia, where it's tied to a sexual fetish rather than an identity issue, but it can bloom into the identity question. So there's so many different stories that need to be listened to. I remember there's a Protestant pastor named Jay Stringer that says that we're going around porn addiction recovery totally wrong, treating it like a person's unwanted desires, behaviors, and fetishes and addictions are the problem, when he said, I think it's a roadmap to that person's healing. Like, why is it you crave the humiliation of women? Why is it you want to submit to one? Why is it you want to hurt them? Why is it want to use them? Like, what's the deeper unmet need that needs to get addressed in order for the vice to get uprooted? But we need to be careful about this, because we don't want to lead false promises that, hey, if you just get to the root of your dysphoria, then it's all going to go away. It might not, but to me, any self-discovery that we can embark on without judging and, condemning yourself is a good thing. And so maybe it could help to understand, well, hey, yeah, that was going on in my life at that time that I started to experiment with my gender expression. And maybe that was a cry for acknowledgement. Maybe I was trying to express distress in and through my body. And this transgender movement kind of gave me an opportunity to give that a shot. And so a lot of times, though, when people go through the transitioning, as I had mentioned, the issues, the mental health issues, the comorbidities are simply disguised for a matter of time, but they don't go away. Walt Heyer, who had transitioned, gone through all the surgeries, lived as a woman for many years, later said it was a wonderful distraction until I actually met a psychologist who diagnosed him with dissociative disorder and sexual abuse and the trauma, that he realized, wait a minute, this was not the answer. This is just a big distraction.
Yeah. Wow. So helpful. That is helpful. Look, this is, I mean, I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit here, but just something you said there that just really grabbed me is, I mean, what for someone who I mean, again, is a faithful person. They haven't chosen this, you know, they haven't chosen the feelings of gender dysphoria they might be going through. They wish it would go away. They wish it could be healed. Like, they might be praying for that there would be peace in their life around how they live and dress and all that stuff. And of course, there's so much push, right, in our culture now to just be like, okay, well, you know, they need to transition. You know, you should start. You know, you need to come up. You know. You need to demand people use, you know, these pronouns. You should dress, you know, you can start dressing in a different way, or you start using, you know, to start using the other bathroom. And then you know, like there's then, but like what would life look like for a Catholic with gender dysphoria? Like, what is the what is the end game for someone that might be like, I struggle with this? Like, is it okay for them to be like, all right, this could be something that I might just need to keep bringing to Jesus, and just like have ongoing healing in that area. It may never ever go away completely, but like is that okay? Because I feel like it's kind of like, if you experience that, you either just have to hide it and be really quiet about it and don't let anybody know, or you just got to transition. But like, what is there a third way for Catholics to kind of live this and to struggle with that? Is that okay to not?
The world will tell them no, that there's no possible outlet for any of this except transition. It is a one pathway of treatment, that if you feel you're trans, you are trans, and so go down this path and then all will be peachy. I mean, that is the single standard of care for this entire issue. To me, it's a very myopic way to view this. This is why 35 of the psychologists who worked for the clinic, the biggest one in the UK called the Tavistock Clinic, 35 of their psychologists quit because they said, we are not being allowed to explore the deeper psychological issues with these kids. And they did an audit of the young people who are coming through the doors there. They audited 124 of them and found out that 97.5% of them had comorbidities of depression, anxiety, trauma, autism, family dysfunction, divorce, all kinds of stuff going on in their lives. Now, literally only 2.5% only had gender dysphoria going on in their life. And they were not being allowed to explore and treat the deeper issues because it didn't fit the narrative of, well, if you think you're trans, and if you're trans, you transition. That is the pathway. And so these are not, you know, conservative Catholic counselors over in the UK. These are, you know, progressive people working for a gender clinic saying, like, we're out of here. Like, you guys are not, you know, you guys are collaborating with a mental illness at this point instead of actually treating it. And so for a Catholic who experiences gender dysphoria, I think step one to be realized, you are loved by God who created you, that God did not make a mistake when he made you, that if God could say anything to you, he'd remind you of the book of wisdom says that, God, you loathe none of the things that you have created, for you would not have created something if you had hated it. That God loves you. He didn't make a mistake that he made you. And that also that you were not born into the wrong body. You were born into the wrong culture, a culture that's actually trying to tell you that you probably need to hurt your body in order to be your authentic self. Like, your body doesn't need to be reconstructed. Our culture needs to be reconstructed. And God has created you for such a time as this to help reconstruct this broken culture. And so don't buy the narrative you have to hurt yourself to be yourself. You know, that is not from God. God loves you, and he sees the anguish that you've been through. Nobody has seen it except for him and you. I mean, you could relate to people on Tumblr. You know, you might have people in like a Spectrum Alliance group on your high school campus that could kind of commiserate with some of the experiences of what it's felt like to identify as trans and not be accepted in your faith community. But only God knows those nights, those tears on the pillow when it's just nobody but you and him. Like, only he knows the dark nights that you've been through, and that he loves you and he's with you and he's cheering for you in the sense that he wants you to realize there's hope. It isn't a lifetime of just misery and loneliness and repression, that healing is possible, but that he knows that you didn't choose to feel this way, that he loves you and he wants to walk with you in this. Could the feelings go away? They might. Could they go down by 50%? They might. They might change and fluctuate and go up and then down a little bit later and up and down. They may. But the nice thing is your holiness doesn't depend on your dysphoria, meaning it's not like if you get really, really holy, all the dysphoria goes away. And then you're really close to God. It's like, no. He's with you on the cross. He's like with you in your agony in your garden. And that our holiness is not measured by how masculine I feel. I mean, or who I'm attracted to. Because a lot of people think, well, if you're a heterosexual male, then like you're more manly. Like, well, I wish that was true, because then I could be like, wow, girls are pretty. I'm really manly. But like, it doesn't work like that. It'd be nice if it did, but my masculinity is not measured by who I'm attracted to. You know, my holiness is not measured by how manly I feel. And then if I feel more effeminate, then I'm just not that much of a man of God. God doesn't measure us on these scales. That you could be wrestling severely with dysphoria and be well on your path to sainthood, to cling to God, to trust God, and find people in your life who you can be open with, who you can share with this struggle. And you could hopefully tell them, hey, I hear you referring to me as he, that really stresses me out. And that really causes me a lot of distress. And hopefully they'll be loving enough to realize, okay, well, if that's a source of distress, maybe we could just kind of avoid the pronoun thing right now. And I could accept that that's a struggle for you. And they might say, look, I don't feel on board calling you she, but if hearing he really stresses you out, then, hey, I don't want to hurt you. And I'm going to walk with you on this. So there's reasonable accommodations that I think could be made to accompany people who experience gender dysphoria to know that God loves them, the church loves them, and that this is their home.
Amen. Amen. That's beautiful. Really, really good. So look, I mean, just coming back to the whole experience with I mean, I can imagine that young people of faith might go through like a bit of some spiritual darkness or dryness, or even frustration with God, some anger with God about like, why did you give me these feelings? I mean, and we could apply that to so many sexual struggles, right? Like, why am I like this? And of course, we only ever do things to try to experience more love, more joy, more peace, and it's to avoid pain and suffering and struggle, right? So for any young person that might be like, okay, you know, I'm praying and I'm not really getting a lot of relief, I'm not really getting a lot of healing. You know, maybe I should explore, if transitioning is actually going to bring me the peace and the healing and the freedom that I want, but I'm never going to know until I try. What advice would you give, or what could you say about how safe really is the transitioning process? I mean, I know I've read a little bit of what you've written, and I know you shared there's a few stages of transitioning like that. There's that social transition with the pronouns and the bathrooms and the cross-dressing, but then there's that more serious kind of transition with hormones to block and stop puberty in young people, like then like cross-sex hormones, and then eventually there's physical surgeries. I mean, I don't even know if young people, like once they start the process, I think like they may not realize what they're actually in for, like what they're agreeing to continue to do to make this change permanent, long lasting. Could you give a bit of a window into what like what transitioning actually looks like.
Yeah.
And is it safe or is it actually harmful in the end?
Yeah, I'm reading a book right now by Hannah Barnes. She is a journalist who investigated the collapse of the Tavistock Gender Clinic. And in there, she was talking about how one of their psychologists took the counseling group he was working with of kids who are considering transitioning and paired them up with another group he was counseling of people who had transitioned and were wrestling with the fallout of that. And he put the two groups together, and so that they could talk to each other and get to know each other's stories. And he said once he did that, something fascinating happened. 98% of the kids who were thinking of transitioning changed their minds. They're like, oh, okay, thanks. We're out. We'll figure it out some other way. 98% of them desisted in wanting to transition just by spending time with some of these people who had, because those people were very raw and honest of like, yeah, I went on the puberty blockers and now I've had 6 broken bones since then. Well, why? Well, because it pauses not only puberty, it pauses your bone development. We've got osteoporosis now showing up in 15-year-old kids. It pauses your neurological development. I mean, you're giving kids drugs that are typically given to chemically castrate male sex offenders, and you can't regrow that bone when you're 24, 25. So God knows where these individuals are going to be when they're 80 years old, and they only went halfway through their critical bone development period. I mean, what's going to be happening then in terms of the lawsuits flooding in? I mean, that's just the puberty blockers. Then you go on cross-sex hormones, which typically you always do after getting the puberty blockers. It'll sterilize you immediately. If you go from puberty blockers to cross-sex hormones, you're sterilized for the rest of your life. As a girl, you go on the testosterone, your risk of heart disease quadruples. You'll have to get your uterus surgically removed within 5 years because the increased risk of endometrial cancer. Then you go through the surgeries, and obviously there, I mean, this is life-changing stuff. Because like if a man gets an orchiectomy of his testes removed, and then he changes his mind 20 years later, well, tough. You now need to go on synthetic testosterone for the rest of your life because your body can't produce that anymore as it should be. Or when the girl's goes through the double mastectomy, they tell her, well, if you ever want breasts at a later time in life, you can just go get them. No, you can't. That doesn't work like that. We can reconstruct a breast mound, which is what's done through plastic surgery, but you're never going to be able to breastfeed your children. Your chest is never going to look normal again. I mean, they're actually moving the nipples on the chest to different locations to masculinize it, creating new scar tissue, removing a lot of the erogenous sensation in these body parts that these kids are never able to fully reach sexual maturity. I mean, and it reads as a house of horrors when you read some of these surgeries, because like you put a boy on puberty blockers, and then and it'll make it easier for him to surgically transition later. Okay, well, if he wants to have bottom surgery, what tissue are they going to use to construct the neovagina when he never had a fully formed male penis? They have to harvest intestinal tissue from inside the body to construct this wound in the male body to even resemble a vaginal opening. And you start reading through all this stuff, and it's understandable why within 10 years of these operations, they have a suicide rate 19 times higher than the general population. You isolate out the female to male transitioners, you're looking at a suicide rate more than 40 times higher than the general population. And so this narrative that if you don't let them transition, they'll just kill themselves, the data does not support that at all. We do not have this huge body of literature showing all these young trans suicide victims. And then finally, when puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones came out, the suicide rate finally plummeted, like the polio vaccine eradicating that disease. No, the opposite is actually what happened. The availability of these treatments is creating a spike in the suicide rate because it's kind of sweeping under the rug the issues that actually need clinical intervention in mutilating healthy body parts under a false promise that it's all going to go away. And now we've got, at least against the Tavistock Clinic, more than 1,000 lawsuits against them. I mean, even just one of them went up to the High Court in England and they ruled in her favor. And so this whole change that I think we're going to see is going to be fueled by detransitioners suing the pants off of these medical institutions. And entire institutions are going to become bankrupt by the time this thing's all said and done. It's going to be worse than the whole lobotomy scandal a century ago.
Wow. Okay. That's hard hitting even for me. There's a lot there I didn't know about or had ever thought about. I mean, this is a culture of death, right? And what's happening is where these young people, I mean, they're being robbed of the possibility of ever becoming mothers or fathers. I mean, this all ties in, right, to what John Paul II was talking about with a culture of death. I feel like so many people have already been so wounded. I'm conscious of the time, sorry, but so many people have already been like so wounded. And I think, as you mentioned, I feel that the healing that is going to come from the pain of detransitioners that are speaking out and sharing like what has harmed them and what the work that they're doing. However, just kind of obviously that's not very there will be few people who will be called to speak about this issue from that perspective, right? The average person like you and I are really just going to be trying to speak, love and understanding and mercy into this issue and into with these people. Just to close, I suppose, on a message of hope for the future. What do you think is the best way for the average Catholic to really help to turn the culture around on this issue? Like, what is it like? What are the one thing, the few things that we really need to start doing to help people who are struggling with this?
Well, I think we've got to be bold and speak up about this because the vast majority of people in culture are not on board with it. I mean, you look at what happened here in the States with Bud Light, and they came out with that Dylan Mulvaney, trans activist on the cans. They lost $5 billion of revenue in a single week as a value as a company. That tells you a lot of people are not on board with this. They're not swimming ahead. Oh yeah, you be you. They're just kind of going along with it as long as it's socially or financially expedient to do so. Meaning, if I think speaking out about this is going to make me ostracized in my workplace, then I'm just going to shut up and I'll do the whole preferred pronoun thing in the footer of my email if that's what you want me to do. Most people are not on board with this. And so we've got to learn how to speak up with charity, but with boldness about this, because if all that needs for evil to thrive is for good people, they say, to do nothing. And so we've got to be bold and speak up. We also have to learn how to accompany these individuals with love instead of treating them like they have leprosy. Oh, I can't have my kid hang out with your kid. No, you're not allowed in our youth group. And I'm like, no. Like the church is a big mess and it's a hospital for sinners more than it is like a museum for saints. And we all have our issues. And so we've got to welcome individuals who may be on the path of this and walk with them in their life. But then also I think we need to give a platform to detransitioners to help them to say, hey, your voice needs to be heard. You guys are going to be the prophets that are going to change this whole culture. And you guys have paid a unique price. And so you're going to be a very valuable witness to the people that might be considering this as a path for their life, to realize, okay, you're a mile ahead down the road from where I think I want to be. And we've already got, in a sense, kind of the GPS app culturally of what's coming down the pike a mile from now. And it's a 52 car pile up with ice and fatalities. And we're just hitting the cruise control button, sliding right into this mess. No, I mean, the writing's on the wall. We see where this is leading. And you can see in the countries that have been doing this for a decade ahead of us, where it has brought them and how they're reversing course. We need to, for love, especially of the young people, to speak out on this, to not let it infiltrate our school systems, our politics, our laws. We need to be running for school board, and you need to be getting involved in this stuff instead of just turning a blind eye and hoping for the best. So speak up, treat these individuals with love, study this topic at our website, chastity.com. You just go to chastity.com/gender, and we've got tons of resources there. Books, websites, blogs, detransitioning, legal advice, all that stuff, even for schools and churches at chastity.com/gender.
Amazing. Thanks, mate. That was going to be my last question, is how people can get in touch with you and your work. Again, I would just encourage people to check out your Lust is Boring podcast as well. You have covered a lot of this stuff on your own podcast and interviewing other guests. Your website is amazing, and I think I got to chase this up more, but I'm keen to start getting your book and then start bringing them to our events and to start giving that book out to young people. I think it's one of the most important topics right now to be talking about. So, Jason, thanks so much, mate. I'm also going to give, I mean, we always say this at the end of our podcast, but if the Fire Up podcast has blessed you, we do ask you to consider to consider helping us. So for as little as $10 a month, you can help to support the work of Fire Up Ministries and our podcast and things like that. But I would also encourage people to donate to the Chastity Project as well. You guys are doing this at a scale far bigger than us, and the work that you're doing is so important. We're obviously shooting for the same goal, but I would really encourage people to also pray about becoming a donor to the Chastity Project as well. And I think you get access to some extra bonus stuff as well if you're donating to the Chastity Project. Please follow what Jason's doing online. Subscribe to the Chastity Project YouTube channel, his Instagram, Facebook. They post a lot of just before you're about to give a talk. It's a great opportunity for us to intercede for those talks. So I'd really encourage you to follow everything that Jason is doing, and most importantly, pray for his work and his family. So Jason, thanks so much, brother. That was really primarily helpful for me as someone that's praying about getting into this topic a little bit more. But it was so good to have you on the podcast, mate. God bless you.
Well, keep up the great work out there, and hope to see y'all come December.
Amen.